Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video. And yes, I know it has been a while, and that seems to be a pretty consistent thing nowadays. My uploads are anything but regular. But aside from that, today I'll be bringing you a little bit of a discussion on a knife you're probably sick of seeing at this point. And that is the Wright Son Ettrick. Now, this particular knife, you, again, probably, if you've been frequenting my channel for any period of time, you will have seen these quite a lot. This particular model's in rosewood, and it's kind of their simple, cheaper variety of the knife, although you can get it in some nicer materials, such as buffalo horn, ebony, and such like. But this is not the model we're talking about today. The model I'm going to be discussing is rather a unique one, as it was a special factory order by moonrakerknives.co.uk. And Moonraker is a fairly well-known, I suppose, in the UK knife community, retailer of different types of knives, and they tend to specialize in traditionals. And this particular model was quite new, and I was actually informed by a subscriber of mine, and I believe that would be Ed Barker, and he told me that these particular knives are available, and almost immediately after hearing that, I went and looked, and figured because they were limited in production, I had to get one. So I bought it, and it took a while to eventually arrive, but that's Canada Post for you. But regardless, here is the knife. And this handle material we have here is olive wood. Now, I have had some other olive wood knives, and I will probably bring them out sometime soon, as I'm going to be doing a few re-reviews on some knives with olive wood, hopefully in the next couple weeks. But this is definitely the nicest olive wood I have. But as I usually would, normally I discuss the history of the knife, but I've talked about this knife's history so much, there's very little left to say that's of any real importance. So if you want to know more about these, I have quite a few other videos on them, and I've talked about them a bit more in depth then. But this is just having a look at this particular model, what the fit and finish is like, and perhaps whether or not there are any differences to another Ettrick that, say, isn't a special factory order. So without further ado, let's have a look. You've got your brass pins on either side of the knife, and they are very, very smooth. You can't feel them whatsoever. Perfectly sanded. Same thing on this side. Back with brass liners houses a polished carbon spring, although this will patina over time alongside the blade. And while it does look like there's a pretty substantial gap running throughout, while this would bug me normally, holding it up to the light, absolutely nothing seems to be shining through. And that can't be said for some of the other Ettricks that Wright has done. For example, here's a buffalo horn variety, and you can actually see right there, you can see the table through the knife, as the gap here is quite substantial. However, with this model, it would seem nothing is shining through. And again, this is still a bit of a cosmetic gap, and I could see this bugging some people, but it's not one of the ones that's going to affect the overall purpose or function of the knife. Although, again, it would be nice to see, well, no gaps, but I can forgive that. The bolsters are polished nickel silver. Again, transitions are very, very nice. They're a little bit sketchier here. I think there's a tiny bit of, you can see the cover is a little raised. but on this side, again, very smooth. Blade play is non-existent, and the same can be said with all of my Ettrick knives. The blade is C70 carbon steel, which again, as I've said before, it's a fairly traditional classic carbon steel that is fairly easy to sharpen up and takes a very fine edge, but as would be expected, it doesn't hold it for very long and thus requires frequent maintenance. Also, of course, being a carbon steel, it will rust or patina if left uncared for, so a good drop of mineral oil, general purpose, will do just fine to prevent corrosion or tarnish. But it's a nice satin finish here, a bit of a hollow grind. And one thing that very much impressed me with this knife is it's one of the few Arthur Wrights to actually come usably sharp. Most of them arrive almost blunt, and if not blunt, they're sharp enough to pry open a package, and it will make it easier than, say, using your teeth, but it does not make the process easy, as a knife should. However, this particular one, I will do a demonstration. I have not tampered with the edge. I have not tried sharpening it or stropping it. This is the factory edge. And here's a paper for cutting test. And you can see that maybe not... Oh, there's where it starts failing. So, it's certainly not the best cutting edge in the world, but at the same time, it's much more consistent than, say, this model, which I have right here, which you can see doesn't really cut the paper at all, just rips it. This is what you normally would get from an Arthur Wright factory edge. So seeing even the improvement to the point where, well, it only bites the paper once every 3 or 4 attempts, that's still quite the improvement. I'm sure there would be many who'd say this still isn't nearly sharp enough for them, which is fine. Again, give it a quick strop up and it should be, well, razor sharp quite quickly, but again, it is quite the improvement from this. Got a nail nick here. This one's nicely stamped. Comfortable to use also. Centering is... actually, it looks like you can just make sure the blade is centered yourself, but pretty much perfect, actually. Cutoff of the spring is a little bit messy, but that's typical with a Wright. And the transition from the spring to the blade isn't the most even, but again, as long as there's nothing going wrong there, like blade wobble, this is just purely cosmetic. And again, nice grind. Quite even, actually. And the tip is incredibly sharp. Now, one thing about this Ettrick that most others, in fact, I don't think any of my Ettricks except for my Michael May, one thing that this one has that is quite different is on both sides of the blade, if I can get my camera to focus, there we are, you can see there is a swedge on either end. And that is quite uncommon for an Arthur Wright. Again, these don't really come with extra added little details like that, but this one does, as opposed to all the others, which are just plain blades. So I definitely will say I much prefer the look of a swedged blade, and if they started doing this with their non-limited edition Ettricks, I'd be very, very happy to see that. But again, typical, very nice carry knife, and The blade does sit quite snugly in the handle, so very little sticks out. Can't quite pinch it, but again, the nail nick is very easy to use. The spring, I would say, is a good solid 6 or maybe a 7. It's not the toughest a Wright back spring by any means, and even among my Ettricks, it's probably one of the lighter ones. I still think the stiffest one is this bog oak model, which is, this one's closer to like an 8. So definitely not the most uncomfortable, but it's stiff enough that you don't have to worry about the blade closing on you. Again, here's the contrast again between the swedge and the plain blade. And both are stamped with a Wright, Sheffield, England, which is a much cleaner stamp than their old A Wright and Son Limited, Sheffield, England. So, do quite like the new stamp. But the main thing about this knife that is quite special would be the handles. Now, look at that side, particularly. Both are quite nice, but if I have to say, this is absolutely beautiful. And you don't usually see lighter colored woods on a Wright knives unless you manage to get a very light piece of oak. So this is quite unique, actually. But I really, really like the grain in that olive wood. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it definitely stands out among my other pieces, as here you have the rosewood, you've got ebony, bog oak, have another bog oak model, and you have buffalo horn. And for the sake of this, I will bring out the only other light-handled Ettrick, I suppose. And this one is from Michael May. That one's an elm, but you can see that compared to all the other handles, which I do very much like, the olive wood is probably the least boring, as it has the most vibrant and eye-catching grain, probably out of all of these. And again, I tend to prefer a wooden handle with a darker wood grain, but it tends to be where the light colored handles are easier to see, and you can actually pick up on the grain much, much easier. But this is just an absolutely stunning knife. And again, for 32 pounds, I think I paid for this, it's an outstanding piece. Again, it's not going to cost you nearly as much as Michael May, and it's definitely within the price range, I'd say, of the ebony. It's cheaper than the bog oak and the buffalo, but the ebony, I would definitely say, is the closest. So, yeah, I am very impressed with this, as I am with all of the Ettricks, and one could call it an addiction, which is probably quite accurate, but I will definitely be buying more of these if they make more of them. So that's up to, what, 7 Ettricks now? 6 Wright and 1 May? Yep, 7 Ettricks. So very much, I will continue to buy these, and I very much appreciate them. Again, they're not perfect, and they never really have been, but for what you're paying and what you're getting, these are still just exemplary little pieces, and I am very happy to have them. But there you are. There's the Arthur Wright & Son Ettrick in olive wood, Moonraker exclusive, and thank you very much for watching. This has been the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.